Hi, I'm Walt Grayson, and for the past few years I've had the best job in the state as far as I'm concerned. It's been my job to go around and do feature stories on all the wonderful places that we have right here in Mississippi. All this started with the Economic Council's Look Around Mississippi campaign. And what a great idea, too, to showcase all the wonderful places that we have that we can be proud of here in our state and let everybody know what's really in Mississippi, which is what we're going to do right now. Take our very own private look around Mississippi. So if you're ready to go, let's get started. When you look around Mississippi, what do you see? Travel our state and you'll discover a diversity in geography. Sandy beaches and salt marshes along the coast to the south. Dense pine forest in the interior. Steep hills and deep gullies of the lowest bluffs along the Mississippi River in the southwest. The flat, rich delta in the northwest. Fertile prairie in the east central. And the Appalachian foothills in the northeast. And there's water everywhere, too. Fresh streams and rivers. Man-made reservoirs for flood control and for dependable water supplies, all usable for recreation. The Gulf Coast with its scenic villages, historic sites, and beautiful sunsets. Our state has hidden waterfalls and some not so hidden. But as you look around Mississippi, what you see mostly are people. Farmers, woodcutters, factory workers, businessmen and women. Blacks, whites, Native Americans, and many other nationalities and ethnic groups. The people have banded together to form communities, and each one of these towns has a personality all its own. It is the uniqueness of these villages, towns, cities, and counties, and the people who live there that make Mississippi a special place. And for 3 years now, the people of Mississippi, with the encouragement of the Mississippi Economic Council, have celebrated the good things about our state. For 3 years, the people in almost 50 communities have been involved in a celebration called Look Around Mississippi. More than a program, Look Around Mississippi has been a movement filled with energy, enthusiasm, and pride. It has brought people together across towns and across the state to recognize and honor individuals and communities which have brought distinction to Mississippi. Well, now, after 3 years of looking around Mississippi, there's a new enthusiasm, a new spirit, a new sense of accomplishment. And yet there's a renewed commitment to protect and preserve those ideals, ideas, events, and those places which have been uniquely Mississippi through the years. Let's look around Mississippi. And as we search for those unique qualities of community and state, perhaps we'll feel that new sense of pride in Mississippi as we discover the fields, the farms, the forests, the factories, and the faces of Mississippi. Let's start out in the northeast part of the state, furniture manufacturing capital of the nation nowadays. Tupelo is one of the more famous cities there, famous as the boyhood home of Elvis Presley. The Tennessee-Tom Bigby Waterway runs through the east part of our state, offering barge cargo from Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico. And in the city of Columbus, there is a cemetery in which many soldiers who were wounded in the Battle of Shiloh and later died after being evacuated to makeshift hospitals in Columbus were buried. Well, 1 year exactly after the end of the Civil War, the ladies of Columbus came out to Friendship Cemetery and placed flowers on the graves of not only the Southern soldiers buried there, but the Northerners as well, starting a tradition they called Decoration Day. Well, word of Decoration Day spread, and everybody wanted to have one. And as more wars were fought over the decades and more soldiers were buried, Decoration Day was made into a national holiday. We celebrate it every year. We know it as Memorial Day. American author and playwright Tennessee Williams spent his boyhood in Columbus. And then just outside Columbus, between there and West Point, is an unusual house, Waverly. In the early part of this century, it stood empty. for 50 years, unprotected out in the woods. But in the early 1960s, the Snow family bought it and started the decades-long process of refurbishing it. And today, Waverly is one of our state's reminders of the past. That's open to the public for tours, and it's also home of one of Mississippi's more famous ghost stories.
We have a little girl ghost, and we had been here about 2 years, never dreaming there was anything in this house supernatural or anywhere on this earth. And one morning after we were here about 2 years, I was cleaning a room upstairs, that first room that you saw when you went upstairs, and right at my feet, this angelic little girl's voice very sweetly said, "Mama, Mama," close enough that I could have touched it. And when I looked around, there was nobody there, and I just assumed that I had heard a bird. And the next day, in another room, the identical thing happened. She began to call once a day, and I soon knew that I was hearing something that was not there. After a couple of years of that, we discovered that something about the size of a 3-year-old child very definitely was sleeping on that bed upstairs in that room on top of the bedspread. You could see the indentation on the bed. You could touch it. It was neither warm nor cold, but it would remain there until late in the evenings, and it was always gone. So one day, we went to the room. We sat all afternoon to see what would happen when it disappeared. We talked normally, but did not take our eyes off that bed. And a little bit after 4:30 that evening, right before our eyes, this bed straightened up completely. The side of the bedspread ruffled about like that, and all was gone, and we didn't hear a thing. But she continued to call and sleep on the bed. And one time, about 18 years ago, I suppose, instead of her sweetly calling, she raised her voice very loudly and screamed out like a frightened child, "Mama, Mama," about 5 times. And that day I answered her, and she didn't say anything. And I said, "I really want to help if you'll tell me what I can do for you." And she still said nothing. And she didn't call again after that day, and she quit sleeping on the bed that day. But about 10 years later, started sleeping on her bed again, but never calls. I never saw her at all until about a year ago, and it was one night about 10:30. The lights were on in that entrance, and on the stairwell, which goes to the 3rd floor, about the 5th or 6th step up was a little girl in a long white gown that was high at the neck. I did not see her right in the face. I saw the side of her body. And the gown had a high neck, and she had below shoulder length hair. And I was startled, and I stopped looking at her, and when I did, she began to just slowly disappear into a faint cloud of white smoke that disappeared with her.
Well, Mississippi is famous for its able storytellers and writers, like Jackson's Eudora Welty and Oxford's William Faulkner. But many of the state's poets, novelists, and biographers are from the Delta, particularly the Greenville area. Now, Greenville is also home of the Delta Flood Museum, full of memorabilia from the 1927 Mississippi River flood, when the raging river turned the Delta into a lake larger than the state of Delaware. Well, there's another fun museum nearby in Leland, the Jim Henson Muppet Museum. The creator of the famous Muppets was born here and used to roam the banks of Deer Creek, and may have gotten the idea for many of his creations from those boyhood days, especially a certain green frog that was named after a youngster Henson grew up with, Kermit Scott. One of the oldest sites where humans lived in the Delta is just north of Greenville, the Winterville Indian Mounds, one of thousands of mound sites in our state. Long before the Spanish explorers ever set foot on Mississippi soil, there were people here. In fact, one culture was so old it was nearly extinct by the time the Europeans began arriving. These Native Americans had a high degree of civilization, trade routes to the Great Lakes and the Atlantic seashore, and public works projects that still dot our landscape. We know those projects by the name Indian Mounds. And you'll find them from small, almost obscure mounds, many plowed under and planted in cotton in Mississippi, all the way up to the Mammoth Emerald Mound at Natchez, covering several acres. Probably one of the best preserved Indian mound sites in Mississippi is about 5 miles north of Greenville on Highway 1, the Winterville Mounds.
The culture had an extensive trade background into it. There's a stream bed on the site that was redug, which originally connected Deer Creek with the river, which was used primarily as a means of travel, like we would use our highways now.
In the museum at the Winterville Mounds, you'll find artifacts from not only the site itself, but pottery and stone tools unearthed from all over the Delta. The craftsmanship of the earliest pieces makes them almost priceless works of art. And some of the markings on the pottery suggest a road map of where this culture may have originated, or at least where it might have had strong ties.
There's one piece, there's a pallet in there, a wheat pallet, that has an effigy that closely resembles a god that the Mayans and the Aztecs did have. It was named Quetzalcoatl. It's a serpent god, and that is one. It's very, very obvious that it's similar, if not the same thing.
And found at this site or in the area?
It was found in Kentlock, which is on the other side of Leland.
And probably the most unusual attraction at the museum has been nicknamed Lucy. She was discovered in a cotton field near Leland and moved to the museum as a better resting place than under-plowed acreage. She was not dug up from one of the mounds at Winterville, although there are burials there. And then, of course, there are the mounds themselves. At one time, there may have been as many as 30 mounds here. About a dozen survive, crowned by the Temple Mound, rising 55 feet from the floor of the Delta.
The mounds themselves were built by women. The men didn't build them. They were all working on the fields and the hunting and all that. The women carried up the dirt a basket load at a time and loaded and built these mounds.
They were the first Mississippians that we know of, and they were certainly here for thousands of years before the Europeans began arriving. The shape of their mounds suggests a connection with the Indians of Central and South America, probably what the pyramids of Cancun would have looked like had they been made of dirt instead of rock. They challenge us to expand the way we think of our state's past.
Everybody seems to think the history didn't start till the Civil War in the state.
And these mounds are like ghosts, haunting all of us who walk on the same soil their builders walked, teasing us with riddles about why they were built, and beckoning us with an irrepressible invitation to come and take a look around Mississippi. Well, speaking of where people have lived a long time in our state, down in the southwest is Natchez, the oldest city on the Mississippi River. Natchez managed to escape the ravages of the Civil War and now has more antebellum structures intact than any other American city. Every spring and fall, people from around the world come here to step back in time to those olden days. But as old as the houses in Natchez are, just to the north, west of Jefferson County town of Fayette, is the even older Springfield Plantation. One of America's most popular early presidents paid Springfield Plantation a visit. In his younger years, a visit that he would never forget. Well, this is Springfield Plantation. It's located about 9 miles west of Fayette, Mississippi, in Jefferson County. In its parlor, in the spring of 1791, a young Andrew Jackson wed Rachel Robards. The fact that the wedding was probably illegal in the Spanish territory is overshadowed only by the fact that his wife was not quite yet divorced from her first husband at the time. An embarrassment remedied 3 years later by a second ceremony back home in Nashville when the couple found out that what Andrew had interpreted was a divorce decree granted to her first husband turned out to be merely an enabling act, allowing him to seek a divorce on the grounds of less than modest behavior by his spouse, with Andrew's name popping up several times in connection. And all of this was forgotten until Jackson, many years later, becoming a war hero and then a shoo-in for the White House, had to do what more modern-day campaigners have had to do, skip the issues of the presidential race and concentrate on damage control. Well, Jackson's controversial Spanish West Florida wedding gives Springfield Plantation a place in national history quite unique. But the present-day curator and restorer of Springfield was attracted to the house for reasons other than its brief encounter with the Jacksons.
It's one of the most significant buildings in American architectural development. That was my interest. For the public, yes, the Jackson marriage, but for me, the architectural significance is tremendous.
Now, what makes Springfield Plantation significant is, at the time that it was built, what was once British West Florida was now back in the hands of Spain, who took advantage of England's preoccupation with the American Revolution to reclaim some lands out in the frontier. However, the area that would become southwest Mississippi had become a haven for loyalists, since it was a part of the British holdings that did not take part in the Revolution. And although more than a decade had passed since the end of the war, Springfield Plantation is one of the first examples of British influence in pioneer architecture.
So it's Georgian. The first great columns and the brickwork is the red Georgian brickwork.
The 200-year-old house at Springfield carries with it souvenirs of other early American events. That great series of earthquakes that shook the nation on the New Madrid Fault in the early 1800s has left its mark on Springfield.
Though we're more than 500 miles south of the fault, this building shows more damage from New Madrid than any standing structure, and the slaves had to rebuild that column without having on hand the contractor's equipment that were here when the house was built. And in the on the side, there's a great crack up and down the middle of the building from the earthquake.
And a rare type glass used in the house is found in few other windows in the New World.
The house contains the only English crown glass, a great deal of it that we know of in the Mississippi Valley, which was blown in England in a big disc. And a few paintings actually show the circular pattern. One in the downstairs hall is a quarter round, and one upstairs in the ballroom is a half a round.
But there's no foundation or fund to see to it that Springfield doesn't fall into decay again at some point in time. The owners have offered the house as a gift to any public or private entity that would ensure its preservation and keep it open to the public. But with tight governmental budgets and political pressures favoring other projects, the offer goes unclaimed. But Springfield doesn't go unvisited. Thousands of people from literally all over the world stop in yearly. They try to pick out the eerie face supposedly in that front window pane, and they wander the path where slaves made their way back and forth from their quarters up to the big house. And they stand in the parlor where the would-be 7th President of the United States took vows that would later start a scandal that ended only in the death of his dear Rachel before she could ever take the first step into the White House with her newly elected husband. And all of this centered around Springfield Plantation. Let's move farther down south to the Gulf Coast. Mississippi actually meets the Gulf of Mexico several miles south of Biloxi and Gulfport, south of the Barrier Islands, and Ship Island is the most famous of those. The highest point on the island is just a few feet above sea level, the top of one of the constantly shifting sand dunes. In the middle of the island, hardy plant life has taken hold, the kind that thrives on relentless heat in the summer and gallons of rainwater. Seagulls nest here, so do snakes and alligators. It was to this bleak island that Army engineers came to build this fort. It took 7 years to finish it. 12 miles to the north, across the relatively shallow Mississippi Sound, is Biloxi and Gulfport. And then to the south, the crystal clear waters of the Gulf of Mexico. In between, Ship Island. Ship Island is an important base because it has a natural deep water harbor on the shallow Mississippi Sound side, away from the stormy Gulf. French explorers discovered the harbor and anchored here when they began colonizing the mainland coast of the north 300 years ago. In the War of 1812, the British grouped here when they tried unsuccessfully to invade New Orleans. That's what prompted the building of this fort. It wasn't started until just before the Civil War began. And for the record, the fort's only been in battle about 20 minutes. A Union ship fired on it while it was held by Confederates. Then the Confederates fired back. They both missed, and then they both claimed victory. But it was that battle that convinced the Confederates to abandon the fort as too costly to defend, especially with the war so far away inland. So the Union ship's crew claimed it and renamed it for their boat, the Massachusetts. The Union used Fort Massachusetts and the island as their staging area for raids on New Orleans and up the Mississippi River. 4,000 Confederate prisoners of war were held on the island. 500 died and were buried there. But the brick and earth fort was obsolete by the time the war was over. It could have easily withstood the old-fashioned round cannonballs, but the refined rifle projectiles developed during the Civil War would have easily smashed it. So the government sold off the 30 or so cannons and the fort for scrap iron around the turn of the century. They made $2,000 for the federal treasury from the hunks of iron blasted from the now priceless cannons. Only one remains intact on the island. But there's more than the fort out on Ship Island. The Gulf still laps at the natural white sand beach along the south shore. Crystal clear water that turns that beautiful aqua as it grows deeper away from the shoreline. And these beaches aren't crowded either, and they're just 12 miles out from Biloxi and Gulfport. The trip out to the island is by excursion boat. It takes about an hour from the Gulf Coast, but it's a quick hour with postcard scenes drifting by on the way out and on the way back, and hungry seagulls gliding around the flagpole for a handout. It's about as far south as you can go and still be on dry land in Mississippi, and it's like no other place in our state. Ship Island, where Mississippi meets the Gulf of Mexico. Well, also on the coast and in connection to the Barrier Islands is the Walter Anderson Museum in Ocean Springs. Only a few people were aware of his remarkable talents while he was still alive.
Well, I always knew he was different. Probably as a small child, I accepted it because, well, there he was and doing strange things that other people's fathers didn't do, drawing and painting all the time and grabbing us up and taking us on long walks and showing us how the waves came up on the shore, and shells and arrowheads, and how flowers grow and how plants live and are the same as we are.
Such was life for Walter Anderson's children. But as they grew older, their father seemed to stay behind in the world that he had created between Shearwater Pottery, the business operated by him and his brothers, and in later years, lengthy stays out on Horn Island, secluded.
He would row some 12 miles to the island, and throughout the latter years of his life, he documented through his watercolors and his journals practically every species of flora and fauna and animal life on the islands.
Walter Anderson was a prolific creator, compelled to paint, carve, sculpt. The Gulf Coast first became aware of him through his pottery and the huge murals, the paintings depicting Ocean Springs life he created as a WPA project, and the even larger mural he later painted on the walls of the Ocean Springs Community Center.
The community center was done in 1950-51 as sort of a gift to the community of Ocean Springs. Anderson offered to paint these murals for the community for the sum of $1 in the cost of the paint, and executed them over a period of about 18 months, and they're quite astounding.
But his most famous work, the work that's become the trademark of his life, more or less, is his secret room that almost no one knew about until after his death. Creation at Dawn is the environment Walter Anderson surrounded himself in for the last 20 years of his life.
He became strange in a not so wonderful way, you know. And sometimes he would want to draw and paint us, and we would want to do other things, and we would run away and hide.
Over the last few years, a group of people from Ocean Springs has been diligently going about recollecting the dispersed works of Walter Anderson, sold or given away after his death, for the recently opened Museum of Art. As time passes, the importance of Anderson's work grows.
Anderson will probably go down in art history as one of the greatest watercolorists the nation has ever produced. But in the same token, his watercolors don't stand strongly as your typical watercolor. They're renderings. His pen and ink renderings and his drawings are just as strong.
In the museum are his murals and his haunting watercolors in his unique style that are at once accurate sketches and interpretations.
The pictures are kind of weird looking.
Are they a good weird or a bad weird?
Pretty good weird.
The museum tries to begin to give a feel for the enormous creative energy Anderson possessed. Not only are examples of his works here, but even the rowboat that carried him back and forth countless times to retreats on Horn Island. And his little room is here, too. Walter Anderson is not so much captured in the collection, but is, in a sense, finally set free by it, after so many years of being sequestered in his own private world.
I think he lives in me. I think his spirit is one with my spirit at least part of the time. I dance, and I also dance from a place of oneness with nature. I understand that the air and the earth come together to create life, and I know I have my father's blessing.
The museum has the blessings of the Anderson family, who were rather inclusive themselves, but who find a kindred spirit and an extended family now within the people of Ocean Springs, whose love of Walter Anderson gave birth to his museum. Away up in the central part of the state is Jackson, the state capital. Jackson was conceived as the capital city and then built. It was thought that the capital should be centrally located, and the bluffs where trader Louis Lafleur had one of his trading posts overlooking the Pearl River was decided to be suitable. The streets were laid out, and then the city emerged. Well, today, Jackson is the most urbanized area of the state, hosting the International Ballet Festival every 4 years, the Dixie National Rodeo every year, the State Fair every fall, and all sorts of concerts and sporting events. And to the east, in the central part of the state, is Meridian, totally level during the Civil War, but later chosen as one of the fortunate areas where the railroad would be located. In Highland Park in Meridian is one of the state's treasures, a rare carousel. And so it starts again. as it has done for almost 100 years, since 1892, when the nation's foremost carousel maker, Gustav Denzel, built it. There are 2 rows of stationary animals standing side by side on the carousel. These animals expertly crafted and carved in the Philadelphia style of carousel animal created by Gustav Denzel.
It is the only 2-row stationary Denzel carousel in existence.
What is the Philadelphia style carousel?
The animals are more realistic looking. They have more muscularity. The veins show in. Their expressions on their faces are more like what you see a normal horse look like, or a normal animal.
The carousel came second-hand to Meridian. Its first stop was the World's Fair in St. Louis in 1904. Then it went unsold back to the factory. Meridian bought it in 1909 when Highland Park was being developed. The design for the carousel house came with the machine.
This is an original Denzel house. It's the only original house in existence, too.
No kidding.
And it came here in 1909.
The motor and all the gears are original. They built them to last at the turn of the century. And that was a time when people were fascinated by machines. And the carousel was quite an invention. Pulleys and shafts and noisy belts that converted electricity into fun. The people of Meridian are slowly, completely restoring their Denzel carousel back to its original look. Many of the animals have been refurbished. The 3 tiers of original oil paintings just need cleaning, with the exception of 1 row that was repainted red, white, and blue during the bicentennial celebration. And the children of Meridian can't grasp yet the one-of-a-kind treasure they have in their backyards. That's something they'll grow to appreciate in due time. And then they'll pitch in and do their part to make sure the old machine is still there for their kids. To turn old gears and belts and billows into fun. Just what Gustav Denzel had in mind when he built it. And to the west in central Mississippi is Vicksburg. It was an important area in the Civil War because not only was it on the river, but it also was on a railroad running east-west across the South. The National Park in Vicksburg through the dark days of the war between the states. And let's take time for a little bit of history of Vicksburg and another ghost story, if you don't mind, and it's all wrapped up in one house.
I love what Charles...
McRaven is a study in 18th and 19th century architecture. Standing in the 1849 parlor, you're gazing across the dining room that was built in the 1830s back to the original frontier dwelling dating from the 1790s. Each portion of the house has its own personality. The frontier section is rough and basic. Then there's the federal-style middle section, and then the classic front.
Well, Andrew Glass is one of the infamous Glass brothers that you read about in The Devil's Backbone. And, of course, they were highwaymen on the Natchez Trace. And they were very violent people and murdered many, many people in this area. And Andrew Glass built this back section in 1797.
The middle section of the house was added to the Frontier cabin by the next owner some 3.5 decades later.
Whatever it is, you know, we're coming back into the 1836 section of the house.
Okay, now this was built obviously after that.
Right, after that. That's 1797, built by Andrew Glass. This is 1836, built by Sheriff Stephen Howard of Vicksburg.
But McRaven wasn't yet complete. The front of the house came a decade or so after the middle section was built.
Yes, the modern edition, 1849, built by that man up there, Mr. John H. Bobb. His descendants are still here in Vicksburg.
Outside, it's easy to see the 3 sections of the home. Oldest in the rear, the Frontier cabin, built by the infamous Natchez Trace Bandit. The middle section from the 1830s, built by the sheriff, and then the front end of the house, built in the late 1840s. And the home and the grounds were shelled repeatedly in the Civil War.
In fact, there are cannonballs still lodged in the beams in the attic, all throughout this house.
If that were all of the story, McRaven would be a fascinating study of architecture, local personalities, and history. But that's not all, because McRaven is also very haunted.
This room is extremely active. If we come on over here, take a look. It doesn't matter what lamp you plug up and how many electricians test the electrical outlets, this is the one that goes on and off at night at will. It just does it.
The Frontier section, the oldest section of the house, seems to echo the past more than anything.
In this area of the house, you don't see as much as you do in others. But again, this is part of where you hear things. People going up and down the stairs, outside in this hallway in this section. And as I said, not so much visual, although it has happened in the past.
The visual things seem to happen in the front section of the house.
One of the things that have gone on for, since 1960, like so many of these other things, is the fact that the piano stool will come out from underneath the piano on its own power. You'll put it back under the piano, go out of the room, come back in, and there it is out in playing position.
Leyland says a couple of months after he bought the place and moved in, he was going up the stairs to his bedroom one night, looked around, and one of the former owners was following him. That wouldn't have been so bad had the man not been dead by better than a half-century. And it's one of his daughters that appears from time to time in her rocking chair in the dining room, right where she died 30 years ago.
But it's just really fascinating. You go in there and everything has this golden glow to it. It's the strangest thing. Almost like there's a veil over it.
Leyland is single, and people ask him if it bothers him to stay in the house by himself. He looks at the stairs, the piano, the middle bedroom, the porch where footsteps are often heard, and replies, "Who's alone?" I personally tend to like ghost stories. I don't believe in ghosts, but I sure am scared of them. But ghost stories are kind of part and parcel to our culture here in Mississippi, as well as all around the world, so I hope you don't mind including one more. I'm also very fond of the old architecture in Mississippi, though, and another one of my favorite houses requires us to backtrack just a little back down to Natchez. Dr. Haller Nutt was a wealthy man in 1860. That's when construction started on his dream home, Longwood. Now, this was to have been his town home. His main residence, winter quarters, his plantation, was across the river in Louisiana. This house in Natchez was for receiving guests.
This was to be more or less a home built for entertainment. As the architect says, don't build this house unless you plan to do a lot of entertaining.
Longwood is magnificent on the outside, but the inside remains incomplete, because the Northern workmen contracted to build it laid aside hammer and saw at the onset of the Civil War and went home to take up arms.
It's sad that the paint buckets were left even with paintbrushes in them.
When the war ended, Dr. Nutt's wealth had been siphoned away, and work on Longwood was never restarted. The family occupied the basement, the only part of the house ever completed. Longwood's open to the public, and tours are conducted through the bottom residence floor and onto the first floor and the uncompleted 5 levels up above. And since 1970, when the house was gifted to the Pilgrimage Garden Club in Natchez, the upper floors have been closed off to the public, mainly for safety reasons. But in the decades prior, the curious and the adventurous have braved those narrow plank walkways up there and fragile roughed-in staircases to get the view from the top, and maybe to sign their name up in the observatory level, leaving behind some 100-year-old graffiti. It's impossible to come to Longwood and not try to imagine what it would have looked like had it ever been completed, with marble floors and tapestries and statuary placed in special alcoves. The 30,000 square foot home would have been lavishly furnished and genteelly lived in. But even incomplete, Longwood is magnificent by today's standards. Mrs. Burns lives in Longwood.
Longwood is kind of like living in a dream. You don't really realize it until you go outside and then look back at this magnificent building and say, oh my God, I live there, you know.
Such a home is impractical in today's economy, so Longwood will forever remain a dream, never to be realized. And remember, this was Dr. Nutt's other house.
Yeah, this was the party house.
So Longwood today still stands as a casualty of war, a hollow statue to the lost wealth of the Old South, and a mere shadow of what was to have been. Yet, even unfinished, Longwood is more magnificent than many dream homes that have been completed. But among the state's treasures are places to explore also. So let's wrap up our look around Mississippi by visiting a few places most people don't even realize we have. Caves. And not only do we have them, but some of the most rare ones in the world are located here. And Pitts Cave in Wayne County is the state's largest cave. It's named after the settler whose homestead the cave was located. And the story goes that Mr. Pitts took a handful of candles and a ball of twine and set out to see what was on the inside. Now, he estimated that he wandered around 3 miles inside that cave and even went up under the Chickasawhay River. And it was probably from his explorations that some of the better yarns about the cave came.
The legend has it that years ago the Indians dug the cave to go underneath the river, and that was their way to get back and forth across.
Well, there's also the story about Confederate soldiers ducking into the cave to get away from Union pursuers, too. But geologists who have surveyed and mapped the cave assure us that it is a natural cave, and they have really seen no evidence of Indian usage, and sadly, the only signs of any human presence are modern-day broken bottles and aluminum cans. And as far as the cave running under a river, soil specialists say that if that were true, seeping water would keep at least part of that cave flooded constantly. But hey, just goes to show that all Mississippi tale tellers need to get a good tale going is a hole in the ground. Just because Pitts Cave wasn't dug by Indians doesn't mean that Indians weren't associated with Mississippi caves. And probably one of the most famous instances is the cave at Nanawaya Mound in Winston County. Nanawaya Mound is possibly the most historic Indian mound in Mississippi. Now, there are a lot bigger mounds, but Nanawaya Mound is where the Choctaw lore places the creation of the Indian tribes. And not the mound alone, but in conjunction with a nearby cave. And the origins of Nanawaya Cave are a mystery. Portions of it look to be man-made, while other portions are sure to be natural. Most probably, it was formed around 12,000 years ago as a portion of a stream bed or a spring in the hillside. Later, the small cave was dug larger by the ancestors of the Choctaws. Now, today, the cave is flooded about 15 feet beyond the entrance, but it runs about 125 feet back into the hillside. And archaeologists have recovered a few artifacts from the area, but because of the flooded condition that it stays in, it's never fully been explored. But archaeologists believe it was a sacred place to ancient Native Americans, and it plays heavily into Choctaw legends.
Some of the Choctaw legends say that the first Choctaw that was ever born was born out of the cave.
We have another cave type in Mississippi that's unique to our state. It arose during a certain time and certain place. Back during the Civil War, when the citizens of Vicksburg needed to get away from Union shelling, they took to the hills, literally. And of course, the hills of Vicksburg are covered in kudzu nowadays. And when something is covered in kudzu, it is covered. Louis Gazard calls it the vine that ate the South. So if there are caves in these hillsides, and they've been there since the Civil War, then to find the caves, you first have to tunnel your way through kudzu. You found it, huh? Well, the reason there are caves here are pretty simple. Admiral Farragut shelled the city from the river in the summer of 1862, and then General Grant shelled Vicksburg from the land side in the spring and summer of 1863. And the best place for a bomb shelter in those days was in these hillsides. Now, these lowest bluffs are pretty easy to dig into, and everybody had a nearby cave they could duck into when the shelling started. Now, this is one of the few that are left. This is the Huff Cave, built by the Huff family.
Exactly when it was constructed, I'm not sure, either in 1862 or 1863.
Is this the only cave that's left that you know of?
There are, to our knowledge, 6 caves still in the Vicksburg-Warren County area. This is the most accessible.
No, I see. Okay.
This particular cave has a unique design. It's in the form of the letter Y. As you go in, it branches off to either side, and as you go down the left-hand side, you'll note in the wall there is a shelf carved into the wall that would act as a bed.
But a lot of caves during the Civil War in Vicksburg weren't this bleak. The diorama at the military park will give you a peek at what cave life was like.
And many of the townspeople, they put carpets down in here, mirrors on the wall, brought books down, reading lamps.
Huff Cave is then a rare cave, indigenous to a particular place and a particular time in U.S. history, making it one of the country's most unusual types of caves. But in the woods of Rankin County is one of the world's unusual types of caves. Now, the folks around Star know it as the Rock House, and our thanks to Jimmy and Ellen Myers for walking into the woods off the main road with us to help find it. The Rock House is in a ravine littered with outcroppings of sandstone. There are a couple of other cavelets cut into the rock, and tree roots tell of continued erosion in the hollow, becoming woody trunk as earth is stripped away and they're exposed to the elements, wrapping themselves around the rocks in interesting ways. But the Rock House is situated at the upper edge of the sandstone outcropping. It's a small shelter cave, maybe 15 feet across, 6 or 7 feet high at the most, and 10 or 15 feet deep. Its uniqueness obviously is not because of its size, which is kind of puny when you're talking about caves, but because of how it was formed. The sandstone in the cave has from about 0.5% up to a little over 2% salt content. And over the years, deer and other wild animals have licked the cave into the embankment. The indentions in the roof of the cave are the impressions of 1,000 tongues over no telling how many years. And geologists say there's only one other salt-licked cave in the world, and it is in Africa, and it was made by elephants. So, there's a pretty good sampling of Mississippi caves for you. Natural caves cut through limestone like those in Wayne County and elsewhere. Those that have definite associations with Native Americans like the cave at Nanawaya. Those caves dug into hillsides in Vicksburg during the Civil War. And then one of the real oddities of the world, a cave licked out by deer. So, do we have more things here in Mississippi than you knew about? Things outside your city limits and across the next county line? Well, now, how do we promote these things? How do we let everybody know all the wonderful things we have right here in our state? Well, one great way was what the Mississippi Economic Council came up with, the Look Around Mississippi campaign. Over 50 municipalities joined in to help showcase the things that they have in their areas that they're most proud of. And out of those 50 municipalities and organizations taking part in the program, here's the ones the judges picked as the tops. Well, the people in Covington County decided one thing they could spotlight is the Okatoma River, popular stream for summer rafting. So they created the annual Okatoma Festival, highlighted by a parade and a special program. This one honoring native son Gerald McRaney. You may know him better as TV's Major Dad. He grew up in the town of Collins. The Okatoma Festival gives Collins, along with the other Covington County towns of Mount Olive and Seminary, the chance to pull together and show off their area to people coming in for the festival. Just up Highway 49 is Flowood, and Flowood is Jackson's closest neighbor to the east, just across the Pearl River. The town grew from the manufacturing boom of the middle decades of the 1900s, and now it's a service community to the metropolitan Tri-County area. Many offices and businesses are located here. But Flowood's unique contribution to its neighbors is in the area of health care, especially maternity care. More babies are born in Flowood than any other town its size in the state. That's one way to make a tangible contribution to the state's population. Hence, Flowood's town slogan is Look Around Flowood, where life begins. Flowood is in the Piney Woods section of Mississippi. And farther to the north and a little west is Greenwood on Highway 82, where the flat delta meets the hills. Every summer, Greenwood plays host to the Mississippi International Hot Air Balloon Festival, and also recognizes its dependence on agriculture by celebrating Crop Day every August. Crop Day is a downtown festival with lots of music and lots of people. And just this year, Greenwood is recognizing its cultural heritage with the first annual Robert Johnson Blues Festival, named after native blues pioneer Robert Johnson, who had a major influence on other artists who followed him. The people of Greenwood, through the Chamber of Commerce, have taken positive steps to try to promote understanding between the various ethnic groups making up its population, realizing that racial harmony benefits everybody. And the best way to achieve that harmony is to work together. And that philosophy is reflected in Greenwood's slogan, Greenwood LaFleur, together. Meanwhile, in the hot, dusty East Mississippi hills, one of the nation's oldest traditions takes place every August, the Neshoba County Fair, the last campground-type fair held in the country. Thousands of people move to the cabins at the fairgrounds for 2 weeks of politics, harness racing, and fun every summer. The Philadelphia Neshoba County Chamber of Commerce has taken on the challenge of improving education for students in their area, making sure that everyone has the chance to achieve their potential. The implementation of their Allies for Education program can only mean great things to come for Philadelphia. And then way up in the north, in Corinth, an area of Mississippi that's always looked back at what happened here during the Civil War, is now bracing for an about-face transplant into the future. The proposed Yellow Creek Space Shuttle rocket plant has Corinth busy preparing to tell workers moving into the area that quality of life is not lacking in North Mississippi. And they stand ready to tell prospective residents that Mississippi in general and Corinth in particular are light years ahead of our lagging national image. Well on up to the north, in the heart of the Delta, is Cleveland. The Cleveland-Bolivar County Chamber of Commerce wants all of us to take note of the diversity in that one county alone. Out on the west is the Mississippi River, one-time menace to the Delta with its periodic floods, but today controlled by an extensive levee system stretching from Memphis to Vicksburg. In Bolivar County, as elsewhere along the Mississippi, there are brooding oxbow lakes, once part of the meandering Mississippi River, left behind when the main channel changed course. These lakes are lined with cypress trees and are ready for sportsmen. But Bolivar County also has some of the finest cotton land in the world, and educational facilities there are as fine as any in the state. And to round out the diversity, of course, there's industry and fine people. And south of Jackson, set like a jewel, is Crystal Springs. In addition to the town's fine Victorian homes, there's a project underway with an eye toward the future. The Chautauqua Arboretum and Botanical Gardens, taking advantage of a 60-acre public park and a 30-acre spring-fed lake, and help from Mississippi State University. The development is planned as a major educational facility with total investment to be well over $1 million. And then way down on the other end of the state, at Liberty, Jerry Clower country, is where Gail Borden invented condensed milk and Dr. Titchener concocted his famous antiseptic. In addition, Liberty has one of the few courthouses in the state that has not been destroyed by fire and still houses documents from the Spanish colonial period. Well, Liberty is also blessed with a beautiful natural setting. The Ethel S. Vance Natural Area provides 288 acres for scientific, educational, recreational, and camping purposes. With over 4 miles of nature trails, people can discover the Admit River up close.
One of the things that Mississippi is really lacking now is people aren't proud of their state anymore, and the Economic Council felt that with this program that you could go through and get the people rejuvenated with a sense of pride in their community and present it as a form of competition, and it really worked well for Liberty. We had a lot of people get involved with it.
These Look Around Mississippi award-winning communities set the pace in pride, energy, and enthusiasm. Well, that ends our Look Around Mississippi, so now you're on your own. Our state has given birth to the blues, and that shaped American music as we know it today. It has given birth to writers that have defined American literature, and it has given birth to talented, creative people who will shape tomorrow. So when you look around Mississippi, you'll see where historic events took place that shaped the course of the nation. Natural areas of unbelievable beauty, people having fun with festivals and events, and people working together for everyone's benefit. And a state that honors its past and is making plans for the future. You're a part of what's happening in Mississippi, and probably right now in this state you have a real opportunity to make a difference as an individual that you may not be able to make anywhere else. But to do that, you must become all that you can be, and then invest what you've become back into your community and state by taking an active part in the affairs of your area. And there's plenty of reasons for you to want to do so. All you have to do is look around Mississippi to find them.